when China gets COVID, the world economy more than sneezes. We all get sick. And because Australia spent decades offshoring and outsourcing so much production, if for any reason, be it lockdown, COVID, or anything else, if China's struggling to make things, then there's a whole bunch of things that Australian consumers can't get, but perhaps even more importantly, Australian manufacturers and producers can't get.
So we have felt the effects of that, and as you say, there were quite strict lockdowns under the COVID zero policy. So what effects are we going to see? I mean, is it only going to be positive, if a very slow pace of improvement, or is it actually going to get worse before it gets better? What are we expecting in terms of supplies to Australia?
Well, I hate to say it, but you'd have to ask the epidemiologists how bad the COVID's going to get in China. But what we can say as economists is we've seen through the early lockdown periods with COVID, through the war, Russia's invasion of the Ukraine last year, we know what happens when supply chains get disrupted. We know what happens when the price of things surges because demand is high, but we can't make them. So for the last couple of years, unfortunately, we've got bitter experience with this. And again, after decades of Australia relying on other countries to make things for us, we now find ourselves in the situation that we're going to have shortages of some things and indeed higher prices for a lot of things. So we've seen it with silicon chips, we've seen it with building materials, we've obviously seen it with oil and gas. Which parts of the Chinese economy are going to get hit hardest? Well, to some extent, that depends where COVID hits hardest in China.
And what about medicines? Is that a concern?
Absolutely. Again, it's hard for Australia to comprehend, but, 25 million people in Australia, 1.4 billion people in China, them opening up, so-called learning to live with COVID. The world's never seen anything like that. Will the Chinese government respond by sticking to its current preference for vaccines, or will it want to engage with other countries? Will there be shortages of medicines that we take for granted? Certainly some countries are already having problem with simple painkillers and paracetamol. So, unfortunately, in for yet another bumpy ride, not at all unexpected, pretty much exactly what the epidemiologists have been telling us to prepare for. But, in the middle of Australian summer, it's nice to pretend these problems have gone away, but to be clear, they obviously haven't.
And as you say, all countries are going to feel the effects of this as China learns to live with the virus. But relatively speaking, how does Australia fare compared to other countries? What systems do we have in place? What are our bright spots there?
Well, bright spots and weak spots. Australia is very exposed to the Chinese economy. We sell a lot of raw materials to China, where they transform our coal and our iron ore into steel, for example. If their steel mills aren't running, then it's going to be harder for us to sell them coal and iron ore. Similarly, if they're not making the building materials that we import for our houses, then the time it's going to take to build houses here in Australia, the cost of them is going to go up. If they get through it quickly, that'll be good news for Australia. But because we are so interdependent, if they struggle in the next 6 months, then Australia's going to struggle more than average.